What's up, everybody? It's Roman Gennaro, host of Empire Sports Talk. Today's episode is singular, specific, it's focused. It's the NFL standings preview episode. Here we go. We're going to go through each division by division, talk about records, talk about schedules, talk about rosters, talk about who's going to make the playoffs and who's not. And these are just my predictions. Who I think is going to be good, who's not, why. There's going to be some surprises, some unpopular opinions, some other things. Let's go. So first, we're going to talk about the NFC East. We're going to start in the NFC. We're going to start with the East. And a lot of people are picking Dallas to be yet again a playoff contender, Super Bowl contender, despite all their contract issues. The trendy pick here is Washington. And after watching Jaden Daniels in the first couple of preseason games, I like what they have. They got Austin Eckler. They still have Terry McLaurin. They brought in, as I've said on this podcast before, my favorite pick of the entire NFL draft, which was tight end Ben Sinnott. They do have Christian McCaffrey's brother. I believe his name is Luke. I don't know how much he'll factor in or if he's going to make the cut. But they do have a lot of young pieces. I think it's going to be a young and exciting team. I don't know how much Dan Quinn's going to do for them. But I went with the trendy pick here, and I picked Washington to finish 11-6 and come in first in the division. I do have them tying with the Philadelphia Eagles. This is probably the unpopular part because you'd expect me to pick Dallas, but I just couldn't do it. Looking at the schedules, I went game by game, and I just couldn't do it. There's too many uncertainties about the Dallas Cowboys at this point. You have CeeDee Lamb that's holding out for a contract. Mike Parsons needs a new contract. Dak needs a new contract. Jerry seems to be making controversial comments and then retracting them and saying the opposite the next day. There's just too much going on. You have a coach that the last taste of him we got was a complete and utter destruction by the Green Bay Packers. He's a lame duck coach. He's not going into he doesn't have a contract, so he's pretty much going to be gone after the year unless they win a Super Bowl, which I don't see happening. So right now I have Dallas at third at 9-8 in the division and missing the playoffs. But as I said, I do have Philadelphia at 11-6, tied with Washington. But Washington wins the division on percentage points because I do have Washington beating Philadelphia twice. And the reason I have that is Philadelphia has everything on paper. Philadelphia has it. They have Devontae Smith. They have A.J. Brown. They signed both of them to long contracts. They have Saquon Barkley now. Jalen Hurts another year. But I don't trust what I'm hearing out of camp that the reason the collapse happened at the end of last year was that Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni did not see eye to eye. Nick wanted to run the offense one way. Jalen wanted to do it another way. The coordinator sided with Jalen, and it caused complete and total friction among the team, which is what caused their second half collapse after starting 10-1. Sirianni's still there. Jalen Hurts is still there. And the fact that this report came out a couple of weeks ago as opposed to the end of last year tells you that someone in the building still believes it's an issue. And so I trust them enough to have enough talent to get them to the playoffs, but not enough to beat a young, fast, exciting Washington team. So I have Washington at 11-6 winning the division, Philly at 11-6 getting the wild card. Dallas missing out at 9-8. What I have happening with Dallas is being 9-6 going into week 17 against Philadelphia, at Philadelphia, and then week 18 against Washington in Dallas, and I have them choking, losing the last two, and missing the playoffs. And then no surprise, I have the Giants at 3-14. Daniel Jones's new beard or goatee or whatever he's got isn't going to help him be any better. I released a blog post not that long ago comparing Daniel Jones, Mac Jones, and Trevor Lawrence. I know some Jags fans aren't going to be happy with me on that one, and showing that their numbers are way more similar than Jags fans would want them to be. Without Saquon Barkley and with his only viable weapon being Neighbors, who I believe is dealing with some injuries but should be ready to go, but his only weapon is a rookie with Saquon Barkley gone and Darren Waller retired. Look, this is a 3-win team max, and those wins are on either side of the bye, Carolina and Tampa, and then they'll pull off a stunner against Seattle in week 5. But that's all I have for them. It's a tough schedule. It's a tough division. So if you don't have the weapons, you're going to get run over, and that's what the Giants are going to do. Look, I got burned by them last year in these predictions. Last year I had them coming off of a surprise playoff year. I had them get back there again, and they obviously did not live up to that. Daniel Jones wasn't healthy. So I have the Giants 3-14. Daboll gone. Daniel Jones gone. I wouldn't be surprised if next season it's Bill Belichick and Shedeur Sanders or something. It's going to be completely different next year. I don't know who, but it's going to be completely different. Maybe even Mike Vrabel. I don't know. But that's the NFC East. I have Washington winning and Philadelphia making the wild card out of the East. Moving on to the NFC West, and I'm going to post my standings predictions right after I finish recording this episode. And no surprise here, I have San Francisco going 13-4 and clinching the number 1 seed in the entire NFC. The only losses I have for San Francisco are Week 7 against Kansas City, Week 11 in a surprise to Seattle, and then Green Bay and Buffalo in following weeks. So I have a 3-game losing streak in the middle of the season for San Francisco, and then a loss to Kansas City. So no super bad losses here. Seattle is whatever. I don't think they're going to be anything special, but they're not going to be terrible. So San Francisco at 13-4, number 1 seed in the entire NFC. Number 2 in the West, I have the LA Rams at 8-9. They barely snuck into the playoffs for me last year in my preseason stuff. Matt Stafford is getting a year older. He's still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC, but he's getting a year older. Cooper Kupp is injury prone. Aaron Donald is gone. I think that Sean McVay has a future somewhere else. I mentioned it last year as kind of just a shot in the dark. We'll see what happens. I think Sean McVay may find his way to Dallas in a couple of years. And so I feel like with Aaron Donald gone, there's not much this team can do, especially with the injury problems they've had in the past. I have them at 8-9. Arizona Cardinals, no surprise, 3-14. I know I'm going a little out of order here. I have no faith in Kyler Murray. I couldn't even tell you who their head coach is right now. Is it Gannon? I think. They have Kyler and they have Marvin Harrison Jr., which who knows what's happening with him. He held out with his jersey deal and all this other stuff. I just think there's too much chaos there. There wasn't enough time to set an identity first when Kyler showed up and then when JJ showed up and then retired. There wasn't enough time to set an identity. I don't think Kyler Murray is as studious as some in the organization would want him to be, and he's had injury issues. Arizona's not going to be a threat to anybody. Their only wins are wins that you'd expect them to have. Carolina, Seattle. I'm really dumping on Seattle in these projections. I don't know why. I don't think they're terrible. I don't think they're going to do anything, like I said. And then a surprise win at Miami in Week 8. But other than that, it's going to be a clean sweep here. And then last, but definitely not least, because I, for whatever reason, did these out of order. Like I said, I've been dumping on Seattle a little bit. I do have them at 7-10. So San Francisco is going to be the only team out of the West, in my mind, that makes the playoffs. Other than Metcalf, Seattle doesn't have anybody that really excites me. I was really hoping they would hire Mike Vrabel as their next head coach. They did not do that. And I don't think there's anything that they're going to give to fans this year. I was really hoping that they would announce that they were moving to the throwbacks they wore last year full time. There was rumors of that, and then it ended up not happening. I love those uniforms. That would be the most exciting thing for me. What I lovingly called the Steve Largent uniforms. But on the field, nothing's going to happen here. Letting Pete Carroll go officially ended the contender era in Seattle. It's all about a rebuild now. 7 wins max for this team. Moving on to the North, I think this is going to be the most exciting division to watch all season long. I think all 4 of these teams could make noise. As far as who does, I do have 3 teams making the playoffs out of the North, and it may not be who some of you are expecting. I have the Detroit Lions finishing in first place with a 13-4 record, tying the San Francisco 49ers for the NFC's best record, but the tiebreaker is a Week 17 game between Detroit and San Francisco, which I have San Francisco winning. But there's nothing not to like about this Detroit team. Returning a lot of guys from last year. Sam Laporta was a breakout star in his rookie year at tight end. He's gonna bring that back if he can stay healthy. I've been very vocal about my love for Dan Campbell. I think Jared Goff is the perfect quarterback for Dan Campbell, and I like what Detroit is building there. There's nothing, like I said, there's nothing not to like about this team. Aiden Hutchinson, I love the uniform upgrade. It is very similar to what they had before. I always think about them as the Joey Harrington uniforms, because that's the person I think of when I think about those uniforms for some reason. Kind of taking away from the last couple of iterations that have the skinny numbers. I'm a uniform snob. It's boring, but I like the classics. I like Penn State, Alabama, Ohio State, Green Bay. Just block letters, simple colors, move on. When teams rebrand or have uniform changes, I'm always very excited but very, very nervous because I don't know what they're going to be. And Detroit does have an alternate that looks a little bit too much like the Carolina Panthers. That's black with a blue helmet. I'm not loving the alternate helmets. I think those are unnecessary. You know, it reminds me of, to go on a little bit of a tangent here, with all the changes and my personal taste. I remember being the most frustrated when the Brooklyn Nets moved from New Jersey to Brooklyn in 2012 and being really excited for a complete rebrand to see what they would do, even though the New Jersey Nets logo and uniforms were among my favorites in both categories. And then when Brooklyn came out with this, I was very disappointed. And to see that they haven't really changed that in 12 years, 13 years, is pretty pathetic. Like, I could have designed that logo. And as I've said on here, I'm not a graphic design person, and you had a chance to completely reinvent everything, and you did what felt like the bare minimum. And they haven't changed it. All they've done is add uniform variation after uniform variation, none of which have been very good, except for, in my opinion, the blue city jerseys that kind of are a little bit more like the ones they wore throughout the 90s. I personally like the navy one a little bit more. But Brooklyn's uniforms have always just been so boring to me, and they have skinny letters, which I'm not, or skinny numbers, which I'm not a fan of. And then they had they had like a weird Bed-Stuy alternate, and they had a Biggie alternate, and they had this weird playground uniform with white numbers on the front and then gold on the back, which when Kevin Durant was wearing number 7, the back of the jersey literally looked like a Pittsburgh Steelers jersey. It looked like it should have said Roethlisberger. Brooklyn has really bored me in what they've done, and like I said, I'm a traditionalist. I like, Penn State, Alabama, Ohio State, the Packers, just plain block letters. That's all I'm asking for. And and then when teams try to upgrade uniforms that don't need upgrading, like I said, I was hoping Seattle would go to their throwbacks they wore full time, and Indy a couple of years ago took their classic uniforms and then ever so slightly tweaked the numbers, which I didn't like at all. Kind of reminds me of when you're walking, because I've seen this happen many times. You're walking around, you're wearing an Atlanta Braves hat, and you pass somebody that doesn't really know sports and logos that well, and they're like, "Oh, you're an Alabama fan," or vice versa. You walk around, Alabama hat's like, "Oh, go Braves," and you're like, "No." But the only difference, other than the A's going in different directions, is that little squiggle at the top of Alabama's A. That's about the amount of effort I thought that Indy put in the changes of their uniforms, which I really didn't think they needed to make. But anyway, that's a tangent about uniforms that nobody asked me to go on. Going back to the NFC North, I have Detroit finishing first, finishing second in the NFC, getting the number 2 seed. Same record as San Francisco. Only difference is a Week 17 matchup that I have San Francisco winning against Detroit. Second in the division, and I've gone on record both on this podcast and on the blog saying that I'm not as on board. I'm not drinking the same Kool-Aid that people are on the Packers this year. I personally don't believe, and some of you are going to come for me for this, that they should have paid, that Jordan Love should have been the league's top paid quarterback after one season. He's effectively a second-year quarterback, even though this is his 5th season. He had a really, really good 9-game stretch that culminated in a playoff win, and they made him the highest-paid player in the NFL. I don't get me wrong, he's good. I don't think he deserved that contract yet. You can read more about my thoughts on that. I did a whole piece on contract stuff. I feel like contracts now are more of a fashion statement or executive job security than they are earned by the player, and it's getting a little out of hand. Jordan Love, I don't think they should have gotten paid yet. I would have given it at least another year. I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid and thinking that some people are like, oh, they're Super Bowl contenders. I do have them making it into the wild card at 11-6. I think they're going to be a tough team for a lot of teams. I think they're going to pick up a lot of quality wins. I think they're going to beat Indianapolis in week 2. I think they're going to beat Minnesota in week 4. I think they're going to beat Miami later on in the year. I think they're going to beat the Bears twice. I think they're going to beat Jacksonville and Detroit in weeks 8 and 9. They're going to pick up some quality wins. I think that defense could still be better. They do have a new defensive coordinator this year that came over from college. We'll have to see what he does. I would like to see if they had a standout receiver. They do have Christian Watson, but he's had some injury issues. If he can stay healthy, it'll be very interesting. I do have them 11-6 in the wild card. The third team that I have going to the playoffs, and this might be unpopular, is the Minnesota Vikings. I think they'll finish 10-7. I am a believer in Sam Darnold this season. Posted a bold prediction that I believe that he will win the Pro Football Writers of America's Most Improved Player Award that was awarded to Baker Mayfield a season ago, because this is really the first time that Sam Darnold has had a chance to start in his career with an actual team behind him. He did get a chance to play backup in San Francisco last year to Brock Purdy, got in some games, got some snaps, and looked pretty good. Minnesota's got one of the best specialty groups in the NFL. They've got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson. They've got now Aaron Jones is coming over from Green Bay in the backfield. There's not a lot not to like about Minnesota. I think Kevin O'Connell's a really good coach. I think he's going to bring the most out of Sam Darnold. And this might be unpopular, but I have Sam Darnold leading the Minnesota Vikings to the NFC playoffs. Chicago, I think they have a really good team. I wouldn't be surprised if Chicago and Minnesota flipped, but I currently have Chicago at 7-10. That was difficult. I don't think they have enough to take down Detroit yet. I don't think they have enough to get those quality wins. I have them losing to Detroit twice, losing to San Francisco, losing to Washington, losing to Jacksonville, losing to Houston, losing to Indy. And I think it's a 2-year project. I think Caleb Williams is going to be good this year, but I think you got to let all of that mesh together. It's the same coach, but it's almost a completely new roster this season. And I think we'll have to wait one more year to see Caleb Williams lead the Bears back to the playoffs. What Bears fans have been waiting for so long. But I wouldn't be surprised if they flipped with Minnesota. Like I said, Minnesota's got one of the best specialty groups, skill position groups in the NFL, but injuries happen and can flip a lot of things on their head. If Minnesota, has an issue, as we've already seen, J.J. McCarthy lost for the year. It's all on Sam Darnold now. If Minnesota has injury issues, the door will be wide open for Chicago, I think. And last but not least in the NFC, we're going to go to the NFC South. I may have them pumped up a little too much here, but I have Atlanta winning the NFC South with a record of 12-5. I think their schedule is doing them a lot of favors. They have a 4-week stretch starting in week 4 of home versus New Orleans, home versus Tampa Bay, at Carolina, and versus Seattle. And then at the end of the season, the last 4 games of the season, they're at the Raiders versus the Giants, at the Commanders versus Carolina. And I do think, like I said, I think Washington will be a really, really good team. I do think that Atlanta's a better team than Washington. I think they go on a couple of different stretches where they notch 3-4 wins in a row. I think they finish 12-5. And that's really the only team that I see competing in the division. I know Tampa made the playoffs last year. No one really saw that coming. I don't know if they can repeat that. As of right now, I have them not repeating that. But first, I have the Saints at 7-10. I think when Derek Carr was a rookie in Oakland at the time, I thought I was a fan, and he was on pace to be possibly an MVP, possibly a Super Bowl quarterback, and then he got hurt, and then he just wasn't the same after that, and he got benched in Oakland, and he came over to New Orleans and was like, oh, it's a fresh start. He underperformed. I don't think they have enough in New Orleans to really make a threat. I have heard reports that Spencer Rattler is impressing in camp, and I think if things start to fail, like I have New Orleans beating Carolina in week 1 and then losing the next 4, it wouldn't surprise me if by week 5, 6, or 7, Spencer Rattler replaces Derek Carr, if they think he can give more to that offense. But I don't think there's anything that they excel at, and I have them at 7-10. But that being said, a couple of wins here and there against maybe Green Bay, or they play the Raiders, and I have the Raiders beating them. But that could very well go the other way if they can beat Tampa a couple times. If they can jump up and shock Atlanta, they could flip it. I just don't think they will. Third, I have Tampa. As I said, the playoff team a year ago. I think a lot of teams were surprised by Baker Mayfield last year. Tampa made the playoffs by the skin of their teeth, and they beat Philadelphia, which was seen more as a Philadelphia complete collapse than Tampa doing anything really. Last year, the division was bad, and people expected Atlanta to take advantage of a bad division a year ago. They did not do that, and this season they're actually good. And I think they will run away with this one. And Kirk Cousins, I think, is poised to have a really good year. But if something happens and he gets hurt, as he's rehabbing an injury right now, but should be ready to go week 1, Michael Penix has looked really good in the preseason. Can't put too much stock in the preseason, but it is what it is. And then Carolina, I have them at 1-16. I hope I'm wrong for the sake of Bryce Young, because I think he's been judged unfairly in his first year. I think it's so easy to talk about, Carolina could have had C.J. Stroud, and obviously it was 1-2, and people talked about C.J. Stroud in that spot when the draft was happening. But I think back also to the draft where Patrick Mahomes fell to the Chiefs at 11. Like, people look back now and say, oh man, the Bears could have had Patrick Mahomes, but nobody knew what Patrick Mahomes was going to be. Nobody knew the situation Patrick Mahomes was going to walk into. Like, it's so easy to look back at a draft and be like, oh well, you could have done this. But I think for a lot of people, Bryce Young was the top prospect in that draft, and the struggles that the Panthers had a year ago were not his fault, but people wanted to put it on him. He had no protection. He had an owner that is just a joke. David Tepper needs to get the heck out of Dodge in Charlotte, and he had no weapons. He had no protection. The Panthers did draft Xavier Legette. I think that's going to help a little bit, and I could see Carolina going, bumping up to 4 wins. or so, but I don't see it going beyond that. They play the Raiders, the Saints, the Giants, all on this schedule, and I think they could pick up a couple of wins if teams are looking ahead or if teams aren't playing their best. They could pick up a couple of wins. I think the situation will be a little bit better, but just looking at the schedule and the way I was feeling when I made it, I have them at 1-16, but I hesitate. I don't want to blame Bryce Young for something that is an organizational problem. So to look at the playoff standings in the NFC, I have the 1 seed, San Francisco 49ers. 2 seed, I have the Detroit Lions. The 3 seed, I have Atlanta Falcons. 4, 5, 6, Washington, Philly, Green Bay. And rounding out the NFC playoff picture, I have 10-7, Minnesota. So that's the NFC. Now we're going to flip over to the AFC here. We're going to start with the AFC East. We started with the NFC East on the NFC side, so here we go with the AFC East. I have a 2-way tie at the top of the East, and it is with the Buffalo Bills at 11-6 and the New York Jets at 11-6. I think if a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy, I think there's no reason why this team can't make it to the playoffs at least. I think Buffalo will still be good, but they lost a lot on defense. They lost Stephon Diggs. They lost Matt Milano earlier this week to torn biceps, which of all the injuries, just to hear about, that one feels like it would be, that one sounds the most painful. He's probably out at least until December. So they're already pretty light on the defensive side from a year ago, and now they lose one of their better players. I think they'll find a way to make it work. The coordinator change at the end of last year helped them to sneak up and jump Miami at the end. I think they're going to run the ball more. Keon Coleman is going to be a big help to plug some of the hole left by Stephon Diggs. Obviously, you can't expect a rookie to replicate that, but he will help at least. I think so. I think Buffalo will still win the division via head-to-heads and tiebreakers because I have them beating the Jets twice, I believe. Once in week 6 and once in week 17. And then the Jets, I think they're good. I think a healthy Aaron Rodgers, a healthy Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, I think it's going to be good. Unlikely, but I'd say keep your eye on Devontae Adams to find his way to Green Bay or to New York, possibly to pair with his old teammate Aaron Rodgers. I see them going 11-6. Third, I have the Miami Dolphins. I think they're good. I think they could easily win two or more games than I have them slated for. But I currently have them 8-9. You know, they might grab a win from Buffalo here and there, but obviously New York got a lot better, and I believe New England's going to be a lot better than they were last year. They're still not going to be good, but I think they'd be a lot better last year. So I think the odd man out is going to be Miami. I think Miami took advantage of things in the division a year ago that broke their way. I think coordinator issues in Buffalo and a slow start, and then obviously the injury to Aaron Rodgers kind of catapulted Miami to the front. And then as we saw, Buffalo ended up catching them anyway. Miami has the firepower to win more games than this, but I currently have them at 8-9 and missing the playoffs. And then a couple weeks ago, released my 5 bold predictions, and one of those was that I thought that it would be Joe Milton and not Drake May that would shock the world and lead New England to a wild card spot. I no longer believe that because, for one, they released Juju Smith-Schuster and did not pursue Brandon Ayuk, which receiver is one of their most depleted positions. They've traded Matthew Judon to Atlanta, and at least the reports are that Drake May will be the starter, despite the fact that prior to the preseason, there were reports that Joe Milton was outperforming Drake May, but in the first couple of preseason games, at least in the second one, Drake May looked pretty good. The first one, Joe Milton did look better. but I think they're pretty sold on Drake May as the quarterback of the future. So I no longer believe that Joe Milton will lead New England to a playoff spot, but I do think they'll be a lot better than a season ago. Obviously, they had the 3rd overall pick in this year's draft because they were just that bad because they were offensively anemic, and Bill Belichick needed to realize that the league had changed, and he did not. But I do have them finishing a very respectable 7-10 in year one with Gerard Mayo. I think it'll be a very optimistic sign for an obviously rebuilding Patriots team. There's my prediction for the AFC East. Buffalo and the Jets tying at the top, 11-6. Tiebreaker goes to Buffalo. Miami and the Patriots coming up just short at 8-9 and 7-10 respectively. Moving on to the AFC West. No surprise here. I have the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs winning yet again, this time with a record of 12-5. I have their only losses coming in week 2 versus Cincinnati. A healthy Joe Burrow takes advantage of Kansas City again, and then I don't have them losing again until week 11 at Buffalo, and then I have them losing week 14 versus the Chargers. I think the Chargers are going to be a much better team than a year ago, very obviously, because of their new coach. And then I have them dropping the last 2 games of the season to Pittsburgh and Denver because they will have already clinched in my mind, and those games won't matter other than for playoff seeding. But I do have them dropping a couple at the end to finish 12-5. I have the Los Angeles Chargers at 10-7 and just missing out on the playoffs. I have them as the first team out of the playoff picture in the AFC. I do have Jim Harbaugh's tenure in LA starting 3-0 with wins against the Raiders, Carolina, and Pittsburgh. Pretty easy to see that. I think Pittsburgh will still be finding their sea legs at that point in week 3 with the reports of the last preseason game where Russell Wilson played the whole first half, Justin Fields played the whole second half, and they managed 3 points. That's not promising. And then I do have them losing to Kansas City in week 4, and then a bye, and then losing at Denver in week 6, picking up 3 more wins, and then losing 3 in a row, and just kind of treading water. But I do have them finishing at 10-7 and finishing just on the outside of the AFC picture. And then I have a tie at the bottom with the Raiders and the Denver Broncos. Look, I see a wide range of possibilities here with these 2 teams. I'm not saying that either one of them will make the playoffs, but in my first version of these predictions, like I said, I went through every game, every matchup. I had the Raiders at 0-17. And that is mainly because I forgot that their current QB1, as officially named the other day, was Gardner Minshew, who single-handedly saved the Colts season a year ago, led them to within a 3-yard completion of the AFC South title. And so I think that, him being the starter alone will give this team enough energy to muster 4 wins. If he goes on a run like he did a year ago, obviously Vegas doesn't have the weapons that Indy did last year, but they could pick up a few extra wins here and there. Nowhere near playoff stuff. I'm not saying that, but I was very vocal in support of Antonio Pierce as the coach. I think he's the right coach, but unlike DeMeco Ryans that team is not ready. That team does not have the pieces to go and do it. They need a quarterback. I like Gardner Minshew. I think he's going to bring energy enough to snag a couple of wins to the team. Like I said, I had them winless before I remembered Gardner Minshew was on the roster, and now I have them at 4-13. I think they need to go get a quarterback. I think if Dak Prescott elects free agency next year, if Shedeur Sanders is on the board, I feel like that's who Vegas is going to need in order for Antonio Pierce to make noise out west. And then tied for 3rd, I should say, I have the Denver Broncos. Before I looked at schedules and before I started making these predictions, based on what I'd seen in the preseason, again, you can't put too much stock in the preseason, I thought to myself that I wouldn't be surprised to see Denver be a surprise team in the AFC, and I wouldn't, based on what we've seen from Bo Nix. But the schedule, I don't see it happening. They play in a tough division. They play, the Chiefs twice a year, the Chargers twice a year, the Raiders. They're not going to be very good, but the Raiders play hard for Antonio Pierce. That we know that much to be true. And I could see this team picking up. I could see the team, pulling out a surprise. I just don't have it in the cards right now. I think, and to go back to my uniform tangent, the Broncos uniforms, I really wanted them to go back to the early John Elway look. Surprise, surprise. And they did not. And the mock-ups of those uniforms looked a lot worse than the on-field product. So there's that. Let me know in the comments what you think of Denver's new uniforms. I think Bo Nix, as long as Sean Payton is the coach in Denver, I think Bo Nix is his guy. I think it's gonna fit. I've given a lot of Bo Nix a lot of crap in the past because I think he got shellacked in the SEC at Auburn, and then he went to Oregon and balled out. But I think it's because he got out of the SEC, and now he looks really, really good in preseason, and I think he'll be the starting guy. But I just don't think Denver's going to have enough firepower to be that surprise team. Now I'm looking at their schedule, and I see they have early games. Like the first 5 games of their season are extremely winnable. I currently have them losing all 5, but the first 5, actually really the first 8, the first half of the season for Denver is extremely winnable. They're at Seattle versus Pittsburgh, at Tampa, at the Jets, versus Las Vegas, versus the Chargers, at New Orleans, and versus Carolina. I currently have them winning 2 of the first 8, but I could easily see them winning more than that, and it could be a very different story at the end of the season. But currently, I have the Chiefs and Chargers making the playoffs, the Raiders and Broncos sitting out, but something about the Broncos says they're going to be a lot feistier than we think. Moving on to the AFC North, which is consistently, as far as competition, probably my favorite division. I've loved this division going back to Ray Lewis, Terrell Suggs, Troy Polamalu, Joey Port, like those defensive Ravens and Steelers matchups. It's not the same anymore. It used to be a very defensive heavy division. Now it's a very offensive heavy division. And I have the Bengals, as long as Joe Burrow stays healthy and Jamar Chase shows up, getting the number 1 seed in the entire AFC at 14-3, the NFL's best record, losing only once in their first 11 games. I have them at 10-1 going into their bye week in week 12, and then dropping 2 of their last 4 because they're already in position. I'm hopeful that Joe Burrow will stay healthy. He's one of my favorite players to watch. And I think Cincinnati's going to be right back where they were when they made it to the Super Bowl, when they fell just short against Patrick Mahomes the following year. I think it's going to be one of those years. If Joe Burrow hopefully can stay healthy. Now you've heard from former players that wrist injuries like that can be a bit of a problem throughout your career, so we'll have to see how he handles that. But everything looks good right now. Second in the division, I have the Baltimore Ravens. I do think, for no real reason, I think that they'll take a step back this year. They'll still be good, similar to what I said of the Dolphins. I feel like the division got better around them. They will lose a couple games that they wouldn't have lost last year. I have them losing the opening game to Kansas City in what's going to be a great season opener, and then they don't really have any surprise losses to me. I have them losing to Cincinnati, at Cincinnati in week 5. I have them losing at Cleveland in week 8. I don't think Cleveland's going to be as good as they were last year, but these divisions you split quite a bit. Against Cincinnati and Baltimore in week 10, so I think Cincinnati gets them twice. I have them losing to the Steelers in week 11 because it's in Pittsburgh. I don't know what the stadium's called now. I was just there, and anything besides Heinz Field doesn't register to me. What is it called? Highmark now? That's dumb. And then I have them losing to the Eagles right before the bye week in week 13, and then losing to the Texans in week 17. All quality losses. All, even that loss to Cleveland and the loss to Pittsburgh, tough division rivalry losses. No one's gonna shake their fist at you for that one, except for maybe fans that want the 1 seed. But I think Baltimore makes the playoffs at 10-7. I feel like Pittsburgh works their magic again and avoids going under 500 for Mike Tomlin again. I feel like Russell Wilson is going to run the most of the way as the starter. I do believe that this season will do good for Russell Wilson. I think Mike Tomlin's the right coach for him, and I think it'll do wonders for both guys. But unfortunately, you can only play one quarterback, and neither guy is really stepping up in the preseason to take it. And I feel like this was really Justin Fields' opportunity, and he didn't take it. So it's going to be Russell Wilson. But I just feel like their schedule is too tough. I feel like even some of the lesser teams on their schedule is going to be a challenge for them. They open the season with Atlanta. I feel like they lose that game. They get their first one of the season week 2 against Denver, and then they go Chargers, Colts, Cowboys. I feel like they lose all 3 of those. And then it's just, they can never find consistency. I have them winning 3 in a row after the bye week, starting in week 10 against Washington, Baltimore, and Cleveland. But that's the height of their season. Finish 9-8, miss out on the playoffs, and then 8-9 Cleveland Browns. I feel like they aren't going to be as good as they were last year. I feel like their defense played at a legendary level last year, and Joe Flacco had some magic left in him. But again, I just feel like the division got better around them, and it doesn't help that their final 4 games are versus Kansas City, at Cincinnati, versus Miami, and at Baltimore. I kept waiting to see if we were going to see that Deshaun Watson again, and we haven't, and I don't think we will. Nick Chubb will be back, which I think will be an X factor, but nothing really special about that offense outside of Nick Chubb says anything to me, and I feel like they'll be treading water all season, and they'll have to pick up a couple of these wins that I have. They play Philadelphia, they go to Jacksonville, versus Dallas. They have some tough games on here that they'll have to win to prove that they're a playoff contender. Right now I have them at 8-9. Overall, pretty good division. The 4th place team is 8-9. That's a pretty good division. Anything can happen. Injuries play a part all the time. Last but not least, and some of you might disagree with me here, is the AFC South. I have been very vocal in the past about how I feel like the league has not given Indy enough credit. And last season proved that. They were 1 3-yard completion away from not only making the playoffs, but winning the division. And Anthony Richardson's healthy. Jonathan Taylor, all that drama is over. Michael Pittman is signed. Alec Pierce looks ready to go. They've added Adonai Mitchell, who I think is going to be a nice piece for them. They have Josh Downs, who emerged as the kind of the early favorite target of Anthony Richardson before his week 5 injury. Anthony Richardson looks a lot better, and the defense looks a lot better. The weakness of that defense was the secondary, and they look to have shored that up in the draft. The Colts have one of the best linebacker duos, if not the best linebacker duo in the NFL, with Zaire Franklin and E.J. Speed. Zaire Franklin is a tackling machine, leading the NFL in tackles last season, and E.J. Speed is named accurately. I have the Indianapolis Colts winning the AFC South at 12-5. Second in the AFC South, I have the Houston Texans. I love the combination of DeMeco Ryans and C.J. Stroud. The league will have a moment to figure Stroud out. I think Stroud will still be successful. They brought in Stephon Diggs. I think that's going to be a difference maker. I think the only difference between Houston and the Colts is that the NFL's had a year to figure out C.J. Stroud. They haven't had time to figure out Anthony Richardson yet. I'm not saying Anthony Richardson is better than C.J. Stroud. I think C.J. Stroud is the better quarterback. I just feel like last season things looked to break in Houston's way. And I think this season they're going to break in. They're going to break in Indy's direction, but it's only a 1-game difference. I have Houston at 11-6, and another brilliant season for Stroud and D'Amico Ryans, both of whom will be top candidates, I'm sure, for MVP and Coach of the Year, respectively. Third, and this is controversial considering where I'm sitting right now, and for those that haven't watched this podcast for a long time, I do live in Jacksonville, Florida, and so I'm probably going to get a lot of heat for this locally. But I have the Jacksonville Jaguars at 8-9 and missing the playoffs. Now, there's going to be a lot of people out there be like, you're crazy, Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence, blah, 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 blah. But let's not forget that the Jags had a chokehold on the division last year and coughed it up. They went from surefire division winners to out of the playoffs just like that. I feel like Doug Peterson is going to be on the hot seat by the end of the season. I currently have the Jags going into their Week 12 bye week, losers of 4 in a row, because they play from Week 8 until their Week 12 bye week. They play versus Green Bay, at Philadelphia, versus Minnesota, and at Detroit. It's very realistic that they could go 0-4 there, and then coming out of their bye, they have Houston. I have them beating Houston in that game, but that's a coin flip. And then 2 weeks after that, they play the Jets, and that very real could be a loss. So if things don't break the Jags' way from Week 8 on, we could see them at a point where they're losers of 6 of 7. And unless the Jags win the division resoundingly and win at least one playoff game, I don't think Doug Peterson's job is safe. As I said, I made a comparison. This was also one of my bold predictions in that article, is that Doug Peterson's seat's going to get very hot, because Trevor Lawrence just got paid one of the richest contracts in NFL history. He was the highest paid for about a day, because it changes every day in the NFL now. And that goes back to my theory that it's more of a fashion statement and or job security than anything else. A couple of years ago, fans were calling for GM Trent Baalke's head, and now that's all quieted down because we've signed the guy. We've signed Trevor Lawrence, the franchise quarterback. But Trevor Lawrence's career record is 20-30. I know a lot of that can be attributed to the disastrous rookie season and centered around Urban Meyer, but it is what it is. And as I said earlier, his career stats are way too similar to Mac Jones and Daniel Jones than Jags fans would like to admit. I live here. I see it all. I don't think it's going to be pretty. I think the loss of Calvin Ridley to division rival Tennessee is going to hurt Jacksonville a lot more than fans are wanting to admit. And I don't see the Jags coming back from what was a failure last year. They completely fell apart down the stretch and coughed up the division. I don't see them just shaking that off to start the year. I have them starting 1-3, and that's before the middle of the year stretch that could kill them if they're not careful. So far in the NFL, Trevor Lawrence is a little bit overrated. Yeah, just go look at the blog post where I lay out his statistics. They're not that great. They're not that great for a guy that has won at every level prior to the NFL. Just goes to show you the NFL is a different beast for some guys. I have the Jags third place, 8-9, and to no surprise, I have the Tennessee Titans at 2-15. The hiring of Brian Callahan, I think, is going to be in the long run a good thing for Tennessee, but I didn't necessarily agree with the firing of Mike Vrabel. Derrick Henry is gone. Will Levis is fine. I don't think he's a franchise quarterback in any measure, in any stretch of the imagination. And I have Tennessee winning 2 games this year. No Derrick Henry, first-year head coach. Nobody really else to speak of other than DeAndre Hopkins, who I don't imagine is going to be happy for too long on this team and could request a trade pretty quickly. So I have them winning 2 games, both of which I look at their schedule and I don't see a single game where I look at the opponent and say, oh, I I favor Tennessee over that team. The only 2 wins I have them taking are surprise wins if a team is looking ahead, and that is at the Chargers and versus the Bengals in Tennessee. So I think if the North is wrapped up, or if Joe Burrow gets hurt, that they could jump up and surprise Cincinnati. And I feel like depending on how things start for Harbaugh in LA and how firm that team looks, and Justin Herbert's health as he's dealing with the plantar fascia issue in camp, that Tennessee could grab them in week 10. But it also would not surprise me in any way if Tennessee goes 0-17. That is my standings for the AFC South. I have the Colts in a bit of a surprise, 12-5, first place, playoffs. I have the Houston Texans 11-6, second place, wild card. The Jags 8-9 in what may be Doug Peterson's final year, and the Tennessee Titans, to no one's surprise, 2-15. Now, last but not least, that takes us to the AFC playoff picture. If you've been keeping track, that means the Cincinnati Bengals are the 1 seed, the Indianapolis Colts are the 2 seed, 3 seed Kansas City Chiefs. For the Chiefs, it doesn't really matter what seed they are. They're going to do what they do. 4 seed Buffalo Bills, 5 seed Jets, 6 seed Houston, 7 seed Baltimore. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make my prediction for the Super Bowl. If I'm able to work out the situation with the Madden predictions, we'll see what Madden says. I'm going to say it's going to be Kansas City and Detroit. But if it's not Kansas City, if something happens, if Travis Kelce gets hurt, if they have the same receiver issues, which shouldn't be the case because Xavier Worthy looks to be the fastest 40 time in history, looks to be poised to be the front runner for Offensive Rookie of the Year. But if something happens, if Patrick Mahomes gets hurt, if Travis Kelce goes down, whatever, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Houston or Baltimore jump up from the wild card spot and win the AFC. And then you can't count out Cincinnati as long as Burrow is healthy. I feel like the road to the Super Bowl in the AFC is much, much tougher than the NFC. That's not a bold prediction. Just the AFC is better right now. I feel like San Francisco could do it again. For the sake of parity, I'm not really interested in seeing a rematch of San Francisco and Kansas City for the 3rd time in like 6 years or whatever it is. But it could happen. I just think, like I said, I think San Francisco will get the 1 seed because of a Week 17 win against the Detroit Lions. And a few weeks later in the NFC Championship game, a year after finally winning a playoff game, a year after, coughing up a huge lead to San Francisco, all this stuff, I feel like they will look for their revenge in the playoffs, get it, and make the Super Bowl. So that is all I've got for you. Those are my predictions, division by division, for the NFL season. I was right on some things last year. I was really wrong on some other things last year. I'm looking at you, New York Giants. And so we'll see how it all shakes out. I am thrilled that it's football season again. I'm going to put up the standing predictions right after I finish recording this episode. And I'm Roman Gennaro, host of Empire Sports Talk. Check out the blog on the mini posts that we've had. Like I said, the last thing we posted was an article about contracts in the NFL the last few years. I think it's a very interesting read. EmpireSportsTalk.com. And until then, today is a good day to go 1-0. I'll see you next time.